You know what? We all want love, but most of us don't want to date to get it because, let's be honest, dating kind of sucks. But I fully believe it doesn't have to if we actually know what we're doing. Hi, I'm Kira Sabin, and this is Reinventing Dating, a smart and sweary podcast for all singles to learn the mindsets and skills to date with intention and confidence. Join me weekly as I break down the science and psychology behind what's working in our dating culture and what isn't. Every week, I'll bring a new topic, a trend, a skill, or mindset that can help us get out of our own way to learn how to date for relationships that we actually want. Because I fully believe and know that love isn't broken, but dating kind of is. So let's reinvent it together. Well, hello there, sugar pantses. Hello, it's Kira. And I'm back with another Foundations episode. And it's going to be a really, really good one. But quickly, I have a couple of quick announcements. Number one, guess who's on TikTok? I am. Holy shit. Yeah, that is actually happening. I am there at Reinventing Dating Pod. And guys, guess what? I'm doing videos like with my face and shit. That's actually happening. I put on some makeup. I straightened my hair. I got over myself, which by the way was the biggest struggle in that scenario, and just started putting some videos out there so we can all be learning this stuff, because that's the point. Head on over to TikTok and I'm at Reinventing Dating Pod. Come find me. I'll follow you back. Say hello. Slide into my direct messages. Next announcement, the Reinventing Dating Program is back, guys. I'm really excited about it. I asked a bunch of you questions and I listened to that feedback and made some changes. So a few things about the Reinventing Dating Program. It has been like a 4-month weekly program. I have changed that up. So we're just meeting one weekend a month. One weekend a month, you and I and a group of other single women dig in. That's right. Totally dig in, starting November 11th and 12th. Each month is a different topic. The first one is back to basics. The next one is how you learn to love and how you work. The third one is rewiring your brain and looking at thinking traps and coping mechanisms and self-worth and self-compassion. And then finally, the fourth month, we put it all together. We create your blueprint and we learn how to date and meet people in real life. So you can legitimately change your love life in 4 weekends. Is it your future fucking life partner worth it? Go check it out. There's payment plans. If you pay in full, you get a little discount. But here's the best gig. Because I have a couple spots left on the cruise this February, where you're going to join me and 12 other women on a week-long luxury adventure through the Caribbean. And just as a reminder, the theme is take a deep breath and remember who the fuck you are. So we're going to be working on mindfulness and empowerment and just getting back to you, shedding some of the shit from our world, our own judgments, and getting back to you. And here's the deal. If you grab one of those last spots, and there are shared and single cabins available, you get Reinventing Dating the Program for absolutely free. So you sign up and you get $1,000 program for free. Look in the show notes or the information wherever you listen to this. There will be links to all of those pages. I'm not going to tell you over the podcast that nobody is ever going to write down or listen to. So check stuff out, guys. If you are loving this, if you're like, I know I need to work on this. I know that even if I'm not quite ready, and that's okay, but that I eventually want to date and I want to do it better. Join me. I have got you. We're just finishing up the last program and the feedback has been incredible. All right, guys, let's get into the topic for today. Now, I don't know about you, but until recently, I was never much of a history buff. My mom was, and we were drug around to different museums, which I really like museums. But when I was younger, like a teenager, I was just like, what are we doing this for? But as I've gotten older, and I wonder if a lot of you guys are the same way, I become a little more nostalgic. I become more interested in where we came from. And when I decided to, a couple of years ago, kind of dig into, where did we learn to date? Where are these concepts and ideas that we are so bought into and somewhat confused by? Where did they come from? And you guys, today is going to be another mind blower. And I'm not going to do the whole thing. The whole thing is part of the Reinventing Dating Program. I might even put it up as a workshop for free at some point, but I'm going to do some highlights. And I'm going to start with just an overall historical overview of not only dating, but just love and relationships. And I am going to start this podcast off by quoting some things from the very cool Mark Manson. He wrote this article. At the time, I literally cheered in the air and cried a little in my car that he wrote it because it was so good. And he is so concise, which is not my forte. So let's learn some super quick, unsexy facts about love, romance, and relationships. I will make sure this article is in the show notes. Let's start with a fact. Unsexy fact. Humans evolved the ability to become attached to each other. That is the ability to love each other because it helped us survive. This isn't exactly romantic or sexy, but it's absolutely true. Next fact. We didn't evolve big fangs or huge claws or insane gorilla strength. Instead, we evolved the ability to emotionally bond into communities and families where we became largely inclined to cooperate with one another. Next fact, these communities and families turned out to be far more effective than any claw or fang, and humanity soon dominated the planet. Fact, as humans, we instinctively develop loyalty and affection for those who show us the most loyalty and affection. Now, the ancient Greek philosopher Plato argued that the highest form of love was actually non-sexual, non-romantic form of attachment to another person. This is called brotherly love. That's what Aristotle, the great philosopher, believed was the higher or better form of love. Now, Plato reasoned correctly, by the way, that science, passion, and romance and sex often make us do ridiculous things that we regret. The sort of passionless love between two family members or between two close friends was the height of virtuous human experience. And in fact, Plato, like most people in the ancient world, looked upon romantic love with skepticism, if not absolute horror. Plato is quoted to say, "Love is a serious mental disease." Now, as most things, Plato got it right before anybody else did, and this is why non-sexual love is often referred to as platonic love. Get it? Plato, platonic. I didn't know. Now, for most of human history, romantic love was looked upon as kind of a sickness. Instead, many cultures treated it as some sort of unfortunate disease that we all have to go through and get over in our lives, kind of like the chickenpox. In fact, classic stories like the Iliad or Romeo and Juliet weren't actually celebrations of love. They were warnings against the potential negative consequences of love or how romantic love can potentially ruin everything. Now, that's not what I was taught when I was taught Romeo and Juliet. What about you? But that's actually why it was written. Because, see, for most of human history, people didn't marry because of their feelings for one another. Feelings didn't matter in the ancient world. Why? Because fuck feelings, there are fields to plow and cows to feed, and holy crap, Attila the Hun just massacred your entire extended family at the next village over. There was no time for romance and certainly no tolerance for the risky behaviors it encouraged among people. There was too much life or death work to be accomplished, and marriage was meant for baby making and sound finances. Romantic love, if permitted at all, was reserved for the heady realm of mistresses and fuckboys. Now, marriages were arranged by families not because they liked each other, and especially not because they loved each other, but because their farms went together nicely, and the families could share some wheat or barley when the next flood or drought hit. And marriages were purely an economic arrangement designed to promote the survival and prosperity of both extended families. So if Junior gets the tingles in his pants and wants to run away with the milkmaid across town, this wasn't just an inconvenience. This was a legitimate threat to the community's survival. Once again, I'd like to think I'm this funny, but these words right here are Mark Manson's. In fact, this kind of behavior was so treacherous in young men that most ancient societies cut a lot of young boys' balls off so they wouldn't have to deal with their philandering. This had a side benefit of producing excellent sounding boys' choirs. It wasn't until the industrial age that things began to change. People began to take up work in city centers and factories. Their income and thus their economic future was no longer tied to the land. In the city, they were able to make money independent of their family. They didn't have to rely on inheritances or family connections the way people did in the ancient world. And so the economic and political components of marriage ceased to make sense. The new economic realities of the 19th century then cross-pollinated with the ideas that emerged from the Enlightenment about individual rights and the pursuit of happiness. And the result was a full-blown age of romanticism. Fuck the cattle. It was the 1800s and people's feelings suddenly mattered. The new ideal was not only to marry for love, but that the love was to live on in bliss for all of eternity. Thus, it wasn't until the relatively recent 150 years ago that the ever-popular happily ever after ideal was born. So that idea is only 150 years old. Thanks, Mark Manson. I'll take over from here. Now, not everybody had that same experience, of course. Although United States law did not recognize sexual violence against Black women as rape, they were forced to have sex with enslavers or other captives. Nevertheless, the historical record is full of testimonies from Black women who enraged white masters because they loved partners of their choice. Because enslaved Africans generally had no legal right to marry before the Civil War, they saw jumping the broom as a symbolic way to recognize their unions. And in fact, in 2011, there is a rom-com that came out called Jumping the Broom, giving a nod to this old tradition. Now, after the American Civil War, if a couple wanted to marry, but a priest wasn't available, for example, they would jump the broom and then wait for a clergy member to come into town a few weeks later to ratify the marriage. So the point here is that romance and all of the weight we tend to put on is a modern invention. And it's primarily promoted and marketed by a bunch of business people who realize it will get you to pay for movie tickets or a piece of jewelry. And as Don Draper from the TV show Mad Men once said, what you call love was invented by guys like me to sell nylons. And romance is an easy sell. We all enjoy seeing the hero get the girl. We enjoy seeing the happy ending. We enjoy believing in happy ever after. It feels good. And so the commercial forces that arose in the 20th century took it and ran with it. And my friends, that is when the lies started, the lies that we are believing to this day. Now, that's a little bit about love and marriage. Let's talk about the history of dating. Now, when you think about the history of dating, what do you think about? I feel like we kind of idolize the earlier version of courting or wooing, of dating, maybe in the 40s or the 50s, when our parents or grandparents were pinned or given a letter jacket, where roles were very clearly defined. And to be honest, for the women who are listening to this, men did and paid for most things. Now, there's a part of us, and that I hear amongst my clients and just people I talk to and people who listen to this podcast, who really idealize that time in dating because it feels more innocent, it feels easier. And I just want to bring some actual truth to that today. So dating's actually a really pretty recent phenomenon in the grand history of civilization. As I mentioned a bit ago, it wasn't until the 19th century that launching a relationship had anything to do with love and attraction. Prior to the early 1900s, courtship was much more private, an unemotional affair. Women would meet with several men with their parents present. We have seen this in lots of movies and TV shows before that are about historical romance. So Pride and Prejudice, you also see this in Bridgerton. The women actually had very little say in the matter at all. During this time, men would call on women and the families. And the families would whittle the pickings down to the most suitable match for marriage, which heavily relied on factors such as financial and social status. Now, when a young woman decided on a man she wanted to see exclusively, then their activities as a couple took place either in the household, right? Usually in a social room with other family members present, or at social gatherings. Now, at this time, there was no such thing as two young lovers going out on a date. That did not even exist. The word date first popped up in a newspaper column in which a heartbroken clerk named Artie wrote that the object of his affections was seeing other people. According to Artie, his unrequited love told him that other people were filling up all my dates, as in dates in their calendar. This was in the early 1900s. So we didn't even have the word date until that time. Now, with the Industrial Revolution, women could finally leave their families and the farms and work jobs in the city and live on their own. Now, I want everybody to understand until this time, in the late 1800s and early 1900s, that was virtually impossible. Unless your family was independently wealthy, which was very, very rare, you worked with your family until you married off, and then you worked with your husband and new family. Now, by live on their own in the city, I mean actually that they lived in very strict boarding houses that they shared with other women and a house mother. I've mentioned before on this podcast, I'm a huge old movie fan. And one of my favorite movies when I was young is the 1937 movie Stage Door with, check out this cast, ready? Katharine Hepburn, Ginger Rogers, Lucille Ball, and I don't know if you guys know Ann Miller, Eve Arden. All of these were major actresses at the time. And it was all about the trials and tribulations of these young women living in a boarding house together. And all, of course, the very melodramatic things that go wrong. Fun fact, these boarding houses were referred to as the Virgin Vaults. Now, by the mid-1920s, dating had almost completely replaced the old system of calling. And in doing so, had transformed American courtship. And this next section will definitely be aimed towards the American societal culture, because that is where I live. That is where the majority of my clients are from. And I encourage you to learn about the history in your area. Now, this was a period of time when couples started going out on dates, which also meant they had to then start paying for meals. Now, as a reminder, nobody had to pay in the past. Someone would call, they would come to the family, they would be offered tea and like sandwiches or something small like this. Or, my God, if you were probably like in Wisconsin, where I'm from, you were not treated like that. You were married off down the road to the farmer who needed a wife, or to the young son who's at the farm next door. Now, when They had to start paying for dates. This changed the relationship dynamic between the young man and the young woman. As now it was the man's duty to pay for the date, whereas before it was the woman who decided the terms of the visit, or the woman and her family. Now, due to the fact at that time that employers thought women should only be paid enough to supplement the income of their father or their husband, they could barely afford to eat, let alone afford leisure activities. Women had to count on suitors to pay for basically everything. Now, if they didn't date, women would have a pleasureless life unless she had that suitor, because they weren't paid enough to really live. So if you ever wondered how it developed that men were expected to treat their dates or pay for their dates, that's how. Because women could barely afford to live. Now, there's even a young woman who was living in a boarding house in Hell's Kitchen in 1915. She told a social worker, if I had to pay for all of my meals, I'd never get along. So women were not even really set up to survive on their own in any way. And these circumstances gave birth to dating rituals and other unfortunate traditions that still remain, or at least still cause confusion as more changes today. Now, I'll move on, but I'm going to come back to that a few more times. So playing the field at that point meant dating multiple people, and it became a lot more common by the 1920s. Now, I always feel like I learned that the 1920s, of course, until the Great Depression and the stock market crash, was kind of this really lighthearted and easy time. Liberated women were known as flappers, and they explored sexual boundaries and brought taboos like premarital sex out of the closet. Now, moving on a little bit to 1920 to 1945, dating, or publicly going out in front of other people, initially a working class activity, becomes the dominant form of courtship by the 1930s. Now, money or finances are always tied to courtship. Now, you couldn't court or get love if you were broke. That's what men were taught, right? So access to money equals access to women and access to love. This is the beginning of the school dance as the major social event and one of the few public ways to meet potential partners. My parents, by the way, in the 1950s met at a school dance. Now, please listen to this next part because I think it's going to be kind of eye-opening, particularly to women. During World War II, trying to find a fella for a first date was a tricky task because so many had been drafted. With half of the war won, men are coming home to America, but not enough of them. That was written by the New York Times Magazine in June 1945, alluding to the gender imbalance that would strike America after World War II, because World War II caused a serious shortage of men since they died in battle. This is where it gets all a little weird. So women at that point, starting in 1945, started to get pressured from as early as their adolescence to start securing husbands. That meant that women who didn't want to be left behind felt the need to marry at an earlier age and lock it down. Now, start of scarcity and super shitty advice for women started during this time. So the age of the first marriage dropped. It was the lowest in U.S. history, with 22-year-old men and 20-year-old women. I think it's super interesting that in the 1800s, they actually married a little bit later. This early marriage, getting married 17, 18, 19, 20, came after the war. Now, women were widely denigrated in the 1940s and 50s, which, if you don't know what denigrated means, it means treated like shit. The media reinforced the notion that a woman could mostly earn value via a successful union, marriage. According to an article at the time, married women were worthwhile because they, at least, might manage to overcome their exasperating stupidity and do something useful for their husbands. I don't know about you guys, but if you've ever seen any old advertisements from anywhere, I think, from like the 30s through particularly the 60s, it is not kind. They are not kind to women at all. Now, even though their livelihood was on the line, women were still expected to wait on men to initiate a relationship, lest they be regarded as easy. For women, being publicly portrayed as being in a monogamous and committed relationship was a matter of the most utmost importance. Now, from 1945 to 1960, after the war, once again, women were taught, young girls were taught to start locking it down early, and going steady replaced dating. Couples were now exclusive, and while a couple was going steady, they would behave almost as if they were already married. Wink, wink. The term going steady therefore gained traction, and these unions were usually broadcast via tokens, a Letterman jacket, or a class ring, and this would let the community know that the two people were serious about the relationship. Now, if a man asked a woman out, it was her duty to respond promptly, all the while remaining mysterious and alluring, and with enthusiasm. So this is where we see some of the really unhelpful ideas for both genders coming up. Men are being taught that their worth is in the money they make, the material items they have, and the more money and more successful that they are and more connected that they are, the better relationship or access to women they will have. Number one. Number two, women are taught that men are scarce, that they have to lock it down to even be a part of our society and exist in our society, or they're literally will be, ready for it, an old maid. So this is where we start learning that we have to bend over backwards, that we have to impress, that we have to squelch our own needs, our own voices, our own hopes and dreams, and make sure that we are attractive and liked, because otherwise we won't be chosen, because a former version of our life not that long ago, you would not succeed if you did not have a relationship. Now, in the 1950s, women felt tremendous societal pressure to focus on their aspirations of a wedding ring. Getting married right out of high school or while in college was considered the norm. When did your guys' parents get married? My parents met in high school. They got married right after college in 1964. And a common stereotype was that when women went to college, they went to get an MRS degree, meaning a Mrs. degree, get a husband. And although women had other aspirations in life, the dominant theme promoted in the culture and media at the time was that a husband was far more important for a young woman than a college degree. And despite the fact that employment rates also rose for women during this period, the media tended to focus on the women's role in the home. So if a woman wasn't engaged or married by her early 20s, she was in danger of once again becoming that old maid or never being picked by anyone. Now, as we move into the 60s and 70s, the conjunction of the women's movement and birth control spurred a sexual revolution. And the 1960s and 70s ushered in a new liberal approach to dating. Premarital sex was suddenly on the map because the birth control pill emerged, thereby allotting women power over their own fertility, and dating etiquette underwent a paradigm shift as the fulfillment of sexual desire took precedence. And I think that that is very much still kind of hanging over our heads today in a not necessarily great way. Now, with the passing of the Civil Rights Act in 1964, and with the gay liberation movement picking up traction in the 70s, traditional models of dating and outdated conceptions of relationships were beginning to be challenged. Many young women took birth control pills to prevent pregnancy, so they were able to freely explore their sexual feelings. Sex before marriage was no longer a taboo. Young people extolled the benefits of free love. We all remember free love. That is, making love without marriage or long-term commitments. Are we all aware that the hippies of the 60s are now the baby boomers? Just throwing that out there. There were no rules for dating anymore, and young people did what they wanted, and they wanted a modern day hookup culture. So the term hookup culture exploded onto the scene. And while there seemed to be no general consensus about what hookup culture actually entailed, less people were arranging formal dates and more people were sleeping with one another. And while this era is known as the era of free love, very few people actually engaged in it. And I think that is interesting. I really was sad finding out that my parents, who lived in the 60s, were pretty square and did nothing fun or exciting that had to do with hippies or the 60s or free love movement. Now, in 1962, Helen Gurley Brown published Sex and the Single Girl, laying out what the manifesto would be for the cosmopolitan magazine that we know today. In it, she wrote, "An affair can last from one night to forever. A pretty clear sign that dating and sex could now go hand in hand. Accessibility to the pill, legal abortion, and the rise of feminism made experimentation part of the getting to know you process, and first dates to the amusement park a thing of the past." Now, the women's rights movement in the 1970s also alters dating again. The concept of going Dutch starts to gain credibility. Focus on marriage diminishes. Dating is now about spending time with somebody you value, not just a potential marriage partner. Now, just a quick reminder. I mentioned earlier that women actually couldn't really afford to live during the 20s, 30s, even 40s without a partner. But let's also remember that women couldn't even have their own bank account until the 1960s or their own credit card or line of credit until the 1970s. I was born in the 70s. That wasn't that long ago. So these ideas that we are holding on to, the scarcity of men, that men have to pay for everything. And yes, they had to pay for everything. And don't think that that was chivalry. That was fucking control, because women didn't have money, because they were not paid equally. They did not have access to what men had access to. So all of these ideas that we believe about modern dating and that that's the way it's supposed to be are all from bullshit standards that had to do with holding women back and not giving them rights. I wish I could say in 2023 we don't see this anymore. I think we all know we do. But here's a little something else that I want to talk about during that time that was a pro for women. I believe that and I will say this as a white, straight woman, I was part of that maybe new culture that women could do anything, right? That I could be an astronaut if I worked hard enough for it, that I could be a doctor if I worked that hard enough for it, things like that. That has been a beautiful gift, and I love seeing year after year more female CEOs, more females in government, females helping lead our world, our culture, our countries, all of it. But here's one thing that we also have to acknowledge, because this podcast is not just for women. It's about dating, what's working, what's not in the dating culture, and how we change it. And due to the fact at this point, we still have a majority of hetero couples, we cannot help but also acknowledge that during this time of women's empowerment, of women's encouragement, that we did not turn around and say to men or young boys at that time, it's okay to cry. It's okay to have emotions. It's okay to have feelings and needs. It's okay to express yourself in ways besides anger or sexually. It's okay for you to have deep friendships and community. And what I think is happening right now is we are seeing a backlash from that. We are seeing so much confusion, people just giving up because nobody knows what to do or who does what anymore. And that's a problem. because love is phenomenal. Healthy relationships are a huge indicator of happiness and success. But we can't get there without acknowledging what's happened in our past, where a lot of these really fucked up dating myths came from, and going in with some more thought and intention. I am all day, every day trying to empower women, but I'm also trying to empower men. Because you will hear me say this 1,000 times on this podcast. Nobody is winning out there. Nobody. You know, I love to bring the facts and the stats. Here's some stats. Ready? The rate of suicide is highest in middle-aged white men. In 2021, men died in suicide almost 4 times more than women. White males accounted for 69.68% of suicide deaths in 2021. Now, I'm not saying that we don't have some problems with white males in our society. But once again, we are seeing this struggle and this backlash because we have not allowed men to feel, men to hurt out loud, for men to seek support in community. And we can't acknowledge all the things that have happened in history and all the things that have happened to women, which suck ass, without also acknowledging what's happened to men. Nobody's winning out there. So once again, why did I do the history of love and dating and relationships? Why does all of this matter? Because what we are looking for, first of all, has never existed in history. So nobody knows what we're doing. And the sooner that we admit that none of us really know what we're doing, the better this gets. The more we can then go, hey, let's remove the shame from this and just admit that this is kind of a different time and nobody really knows what they're doing. So it's time to kind of work on ourselves, because picking a life partner is a big ass deal. Next, gender roles are constantly evolving and no one knows what's okay and what isn't. Now, for as much as I love seeing my clients, my female clients, being empowered, know exactly how to go out and date, know exactly who should pay, what questions I want to ask, how to respond, scripts, all of the things, the majority of people don't. And after a while, I think we just get frustrated and give up, because one person might be like, no, do not hold the door for me. And then the next moment, I'm watching a video online about some woman who refuses to get out of the car on a front date because her date took her to Cheesecake Factory. Next, we don't just want relationships. I think about what my mom wanted. I think about what my dad wanted. I think about what my grandparents wanted. I didn't want that. I wanted a partnership. And Danny and I are nailing it. We collaborate on a daily basis. Our communication is amazing. And we're here for each other, loving, trusting, and taking care of each other. Next, we use technology as our main form of communication. And that shit is flawed as fuck. You and I both know it is, right? Texting is not a good form of communication. And that is the start of many of our relationships now. And it's no wonder that there's miscommunication happening all over the place. Finally, we have been sold romantic lies about love and relationships by the media, by books, by Disney, by TV shows, by movies, because once again, romance sells. And the problem is a lot of people still believe it. But not if you're listening to this podcast. You know better. You want to work on this? Let's do Reinventing Dating or come on a cruise with me and do a Reinventing Dating, or reach out to me and we'll work one-on-one together. All right, guys, that's it for today. What did we think of this? I would love for you to slide into my DMs. Tell me your biggest takeaway. Talk to me on Instagram, Facebook, TikTok, because I'm so 2023. Let's have these conversations together. Now make sure that you have subscribed so you never miss this weekly. Make sure you share it with every single person you know who is single, so we're all on the same page. And guys, until next week, this is Kira. Meet Love Halfway.